The house settles into its nightly stillness, the kind of quiet that only comes when the world has finished its hurrying and the last light has been turned low. Outside, the streets are empty, the neighborhood tucked beneath blankets of darkness, and inside, the familiar creaks and sighs of old walls speak their soft language to no one in particular. This is the hour when time slows, when the day's noise fades into memory, and when the mind, if it chooses, can wander where it will. The curtains hang motionless at the windows, the shadows in the corners have deepened into pools of velvet black, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent again. The clock on the wall continues its patient marking of seconds, minutes, hours, a sound so constant it becomes part of the silence rather than an interruption of it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, as the night deepens and the air grows cooler against the windows, let yourself sink into this moment, this pause between the day that was and the sleep that waits. Let the weight of your body press into the mattress, let your breathing find its natural rhythm, and allow the night to hold you as gently as it holds everything else in its vast, patient embrace. The silence that fills a house at night is not truly silent. It hums with the low breath of the refrigerator, the distant tick of a clock that has marked decades, the faint rustle of curtains stirred by unseen drafts. But beneath these sounds lies something deeper, something that cannot be heard with ears alone. It is the silence of absence, the echo of voices that once filled these rooms, the memory of footsteps that no longer climb the stairs. This silence is not empty. It is crowded with everything that has ever happened here, every conversation, every laugh, every tear shed in the shadows when no one was looking. It is a silence that holds the weight of years, and for those who have lived long enough to know it well, it becomes a kind of companion, familiar and patient, never demanding, always present. The walls themselves seem to remember, to hold within their paint and plaster the impressions of all the lives that have unfolded here, all the dinners shared at the table, all the arguments that flared and faded, all the quiet moments of reading or thinking or simply staring out the window at weather that came and went with the seasons. This house has absorbed it all, and at night, when the distractions of daylight are gone, that absorption becomes palpable, becomes something that can be felt in the air, in the way the shadows fall, in the particular quality of the darkness that gathers in familiar spaces. An elderly person lies in bed, the mattress shaped to their form after years of the same resting place, the pillow just right beneath a head that carries more weight than bone alone. Their body is tired, yes, deeply tired in ways that sleep cannot always fix, but their mind remains stubbornly awake, turning over thoughts like pages in a book read so many times the spine has worn soft. Sleep used to come easily, a simple closing of the eyes and then morning, but now it arrives in pieces, in shallow waves that deposit them back on the shore of wakefulness again and again. The body wants rest, craves it, but the mind has its own rhythm now, its own need to wander through the rooms of memory when the house is too quiet to distract it. Their hands rest on the blanket, hands that have done so much over the decades, hands that have worked and built and held and healed, hands that show their age in every line and spot and prominent vein. These hands remember things the mind might forget, the weight of a child lifted into arms, the texture of tools used daily for years, the warmth of another hand held during walks that stretched through seasons and decades. Even now, in the darkness, these hands carry their history, and sometimes in the night they move without conscious thought, reaching for something or someone who is no longer there, then settling back into stillness when reality reasserts itself. There was a time when sleep was automatic, when youth carried exhaustion that pulled them under like a stone dropped into deep water. Back then, the bed was merely a place to collapse after days spent running, working, building, living with an energy that seemed endless. But age changes sleep the way it changes everything else, slowly, imperceptibly, until one night you realize that rest has become something you negotiate with rather than something that simply happens. The quiet hours before dawn become a space for thinking, for remembering, for feeling the full weight of a life lived long and full. Night is no longer just for sleeping. It has become a time for reckoning, for sorting through the accumulated years, for wondering about things that daylight keeps at bay with its brightness and distraction. The young sleep deeply because they have not yet accumulated enough life to keep them awake, enough memories to sort through, enough questions to ponder in the darkness. But time adds layers, adds complexity, adds a richness to experience that demands attention, that will not be silenced simply because the sun has set and the world expects rest. And so the elderly find themselves in this peculiar state, bodies desperate for sleep, minds unwilling to grant it, caught between the physical need for restoration and the psychological need to process, to understand, to make sense of the vast accumulation of years that have somehow led to this moment, this bed, this particular night among thousands of nights that have come before. Memories rise without warning, surfacing like fish in a still pond. A childhood home appears not as it might look now but as it was then, with sunlight slanting through a particular window, dust motes dancing in the beam, the smell of something cooking in a kitchen that no longer exists. The street where they played as a child stretches out in perfect detail, every crack in the sidewalk, every tree that offered shade, every neighbor's house with its own mysteries hidden behind closed doors. Voices return, not the exact words but the tone, the feeling of being spoken to by people now long gone, the warmth of a mother's good night, the gruffness of a father's approval, the teasing of siblings whose faces have changed so much over the years that sometimes the old versions seem more real than the present ones. These memories are vivid in ways that recent events are not, as if the distant past has been polished by time into something clearer, more precious, more worthy of preservation than the mundane details of yesterday or last week. The taste of a particular food from childhood returns with startling intensity, something simple that has not been eaten in decades but which the mind recalls perfectly, along with the circumstances of its consumption, the table where it was served, the people who sat around that table, the feeling of being small and safe and surrounded by a world that seemed permanent and unchanging. There is a bittersweet quality to these memories, a pleasure in their vividness mixed with a sadness for their irretrievability, for the impossibility of ever returning to those moments, those places, those versions of oneself and of the people who populated that earlier world. The school days return, flooding back with unexpected clarity. The smell of chalk dust and old wood, the feeling of sitting at a desk too small or too large, the anxiety of being called upon to answer a question, the relief of recess, the complicated social hierarchies that seemed so important then and so trivial now. Teachers whose names have somehow survived the decades while others have been forgotten entirely, some remembered with fondness for their kindness or their ability to make a subject come alive, others remembered with less warmth for their harshness or their failure to see a struggling student who needed help but was too shy or too proud to ask for it. The friendships of youth appear, those intense connections that felt like they would last forever but which often faded when circumstances changed, when families moved away, when different paths were chosen. Some of those friends are still present, still part of life even if contact is infrequent, while others have vanished completely, become ghosts whose fates are unknown, who exist now only in memory as the children and teenagers they once were, frozen in time at an age they left behind long ago. And there is wonder in this, in realizing how many people have passed through a life, how many faces have been known and then forgotten, how many moments of connection were made and then dissolved like sugar in water, sweet for a time but ultimately absorbed into the larger flow of experience. The teenage years arrive with their particular mixture of embarrassment and nostalgia. The awkwardness of that age, the desperate desire to fit in mixed with the equally desperate desire to stand out, to be noticed, to matter in a world that seemed vast and indifferent. First loves come back, those intense infatuations that felt like they would last forever but which burned out quickly, leaving behind mostly the memory of feeling so much, of being so alive with emotion that it seemed impossible the world could contain it all. The mistakes of youth seem both foolish and forgivable now, the risks taken that could have ended badly but somehow didn't, the experiments with identity and belonging, the testing of boundaries, the gradual discovery of who one was beneath all the expectations and pressures and possibilities. There were moments of pure joy in those years, moments when life felt full of promise, when the future stretched out like an open road leading to destinations that could only be imagined. And there were moments of despair, when nothing seemed right, when the body felt wrong and the mind felt trapped and the world felt like it would never understand or accept or make room for the person struggling to emerge from the cocoon of childhood into whatever came next. Life has been a series of choices, some made with careful thought, others stumbled into by accident or necessity. At night, these choices return for inspection, not with the harshness of judgment but with the gentle curiosity of someone looking at an old photograph and wondering who that person was, the one who decided to take this path instead of that one, to say yes when no might have been wiser, to stay when leaving might have been braver. Some choices turned out well, bearing fruit that sustained for years. Others led to dead ends, to lessons learned the hard way, to consequences that rippled outward in ways that could not have been foreseen. But they were all honest choices, made with the information available at the time, made by a person trying their best to navigate a world that offered no map, no guarantee, no promise that doing the right thing would lead to the right outcome. The choice of career, made when so young, when the future seemed both infinite and terrifying, when the pressure to choose correctly felt overwhelming even though there was no way to know what correctly might mean. Did that choice lead to fulfillment or merely to survival, to a paycheck that allowed for stability but perhaps at the cost of passion, of dreams deferred or abandoned entirely? And does it matter now, looking back, whether the work was meaningful in some grand sense or simply necessary, simply what was done day after day, year after year, to provide for self and family, to contribute to the world in whatever way was available? The choice of partner, if there was one, looms large in memory. What drew them together, what kept them together, what threatened to pull them apart? Was it love or loneliness, chemistry or convenience, destiny, or simply two people who happened to be in the same place at the same time and decided to try building something together? The early days of courtship return, the nervousness and excitement, the discovery of another person's quirks and qualities, the decision to commit, to take a leap of faith into a shared future that could not be predicted or controlled. And then the long years of that commitment, the evolution of initial passion into something deeper and quieter, the daily negotiations and compromises, the ways in which two separate people learn to function as a unit while still maintaining some sense of individual identity. There were good years and difficult years, times when love felt easy and natural and times when it felt like work, like something that required constant effort just to maintain. There were moments of deep connection and moments of profound loneliness even within the relationship. Moments when it seemed impossible that two people could truly know each other and moments when understanding flowed without need for words. And if that partner is gone now, taken by death or distance or divorce, their absence in the night is a presence all its own, a shape in the darkness that cannot be filled, a silence that speaks louder than words ever did. The choice to have children, or the lack of choice, or the absence of children despite wanting them, each of these paths carries its own weight in memory. For those who became parents, the responsibility was staggering, the sudden understanding that another life depended entirely on your ability to provide, to protect, to nurture, to guide. The fear of inadequacy was constant, the worry that mistakes were being made, that damage was being done despite the best intentions, that this small person would carry wounds into adulthood that could have been prevented if only there had been more wisdom, more patience, more resources. And yet, there was also joy beyond measure, the first smile, the first word, the gradual unfolding of a personality that was both familiar and utterly unique. Watching a child grow was like witnessing a miracle in slow motion, the transformation from helpless infant to walking, talking, thinking, feeling human being happening so gradually that it was easy to miss, and yet when viewed across years so dramatic that it seemed impossible. For those who did not have children, whether by choice or by circumstance, there is a different kind of reflection, a wondering about the road not taken, about what might have been, about whether the absence is a loss or simply a different kind of life, neither better nor worse but simply other. Regret whispers in the darkness, not loudly, not with accusation, but with the soft insistence of something that will not be entirely ignored. Words that were never spoken hang in the air like smoke, conversations that should have happened but didn't, apologies that came too late or not at all. There were moments when pride or fear or simple exhaustion kept the truth locked away, and now those moments return, not to torment but to remind, to ask quietly whether it matters anymore, whether the person on the other end of that unsaid thing is still waiting, or if they too have moved beyond it into their own nights of reflection. Some regrets are small, barely worth the space they occupy, a missed phone call, a forgotten birthday, a kindness left unoffered. Others are heavier, chances that came once and were let go, relationships that frayed because neither side knew how to mend them, dreams that were set aside for practical reasons and never picked up again. There is the regret of impatience, of harsh words spoken in moments of stress or anger, words that cannot be taken back, that left wounds which may or may not have healed. There is the regret of absence, of times when presence was needed but not given, when work or worry or simple selfishness kept attention away from someone who deserved better. There is the regret of silence, of not speaking up when speech was required, of allowing injustice or unkindness to pass without challenge because challenge seemed too difficult, too risky, too likely to cause discomfort or conflict. These regrets are not crippling, not at this stage of life, but they are there, they are real, and the night gives them space to be acknowledged, to be felt, to be integrated into the larger story of a life that contains both light and shadow, both triumph and failure, both generosity and selfishness. There is regret for time wasted, for years spent in jobs that drained rather than fulfilled, for relationships that should have ended sooner, for grudges held long past their usefulness, for worry that accomplished nothing except the stealing of present moments that could have been spent in joy or at least in peace. The realization comes, too late to change but not too late to acknowledge, that so much energy was expended on things that ultimately did not matter, on impressing people whose opinions were irrelevant, on accumulating possessions that brought no lasting satisfaction, on winning arguments that had no real stakes, on maintaining appearances that fooled no one and exhausted everyone. If it were possible to go back, to whisper advice to that younger self, what would be said? To worry less, certainly. To love more freely. To speak truth even when truth was uncomfortable. To take more risks in the service of joy and fewer in the service of security. To trust that things would work out, or that if they didn't, the failure would not be fatal, would merely be another chapter in a long story, another lesson in the curriculum of a human life. Family fills the mind in ways nothing else can. Children who were once small enough to hold in two hands but who grew into adults with lives and worries of their own. Raising them took everything, every ounce of strength, every moment of patience, every dollar that could be scraped together, every sacrifice that seemed necessary at the time and still does when looked back upon. There is pride in knowing they made it, that they are out there in the world, standing on their own, carrying forward something of what was given to them, even if they do not always realize it. But there is also exhaustion in the memory of those years, the endless needs, the constant worry, the feeling that nothing was ever quite enough, that mistakes were made despite the best intentions, that perhaps more could have been done if only there had been more time, more money, more wisdom, more patience. The sleepless nights with infants who would not settle, the anxious years of adolescence with all its rebellion and risk, the slow letting go as they became independent, as they needed less and less until the house that once rang with their noise fell silent. Did enough love get communicated, enough support, enough guidance without controlling, enough freedom without abandoning? These questions have no definitive answers, and yet they arise in the darkness, asking to be considered one more time, as if this time some clarity might emerge, some final verdict on whether the job of parenting was done well enough, even if not perfectly. The specific moments return, sharp and clear despite the passage of years. The first day of school, watching a small figure walk away with a backpack that seemed too large, fighting the urge to call them back, to keep them safe at home for just one more day. The sporting events and school plays, sitting in uncomfortable chairs in overheated auditoriums, watching with pride mixed with anxiety as a child performed or competed, wanting success for them so badly it was almost painful. The teenage arguments, the slammed doors, the declarations of hatred that were really expressions of fear and confusion, the slow rebuilding of relationship after each rupture, the gradual understanding that parenting is not about perfection but about persistence, about showing up even when showing up is hard, about loving even when that love is rejected or taken for granted. The departure for college or work or marriage, the emptying of the bedroom that had been theirs, the strange quiet that settled over the house, the mixture of relief and loss that came with this new phase of life. The grandchildren, if there are any, bring a different kind of reflection. There is joy in them, certainly joy in watching the next generation unfold, in seeing traits and characteristics passed down, in experiencing the sweetness of young life without the heavy responsibility of primary care. But there is also distance sometimes, a sense that these children belong to a different world, one shaped by technologies and values and circumstances that feel foreign, that we're not part of the world that shaped the person lying in this bed. The connection is real but different, filtered through the generation in between, complicated by geographical distance or family dynamics or simply the natural separateness that exists between different stages of life. Still, their faces bring light, their voices bring energy, and the knowledge of their existence provides a sense of continuity, a feeling that life goes on, that the line continues forward into a future that will unfold long after this particular night, this particular body, has faded into the same kind of memory that now fills this darkened bedroom. There is a desire to pass something on to them, some wisdom or value or story that will help them navigate their own lives, but also an awareness that each generation must learn its own lessons, make its own mistakes, find its own path through the world that will be waiting for them. Love arrives in memory wearing many faces. A partner who shared the journey, who was there through the years when everything was uncertain and scary, who stayed when staying was hard, who laughed when laughter was needed and was silent when silence was the only comfort. Those early days come back with startling clarity, the excitement, the nervousness, the sense of stepping into something bigger than oneself, of building a life with another person and hoping it would hold. There were moments of pure joy, days when everything felt right, when the world seemed designed just for the two of them, and there were moments of frustration, of misunderstanding, of wondering if love was supposed to be this difficult. But through it all, there was presence, there was effort, there was a commitment to showing up even when showing up was all that could be managed. The shared silence became as meaningful as the shared words, the simple act of being together in the same room enough to carry them through the storms that came and went. Arguments are remembered now not for their content but for their resolution, for the ways in which hurt was acknowledged and repaired, for the pattern of breaking apart and coming back together that over time created a bond stronger than any single moment of harmony could have achieved. The physical aspect of love is remembered too, not with shame or embarrassment but with tenderness, with appreciation for the intimacy that bodies can share, for the comfort of touch, for the vulnerability of being fully known by another person. And if age has diminished the body's capacity for that kind of connection, the memory of it remains, warm and precious, a reminder of what it meant to be young and vital and consumed with desire for another human being. But love was not only romantic. There was the love of parents, complicated and imperfect, sometimes generous and sometimes withholding, but present nonetheless, shaping in ways both obvious and subtle. There was the love of friends, those chosen family members who showed up at crucial moments, who listened without judgment, who celebrated victories and mourned losses, who made life richer simply by being part of it. Some of those friendships lasted a lifetime, weathering changes and distances, while others burned bright and brief, meaningful for a season but not sustained over the long arc of years. And there were the loves that were never spoken, the attractions and affections that remained hidden, either because they were inappropriate or because courage was lacking or because the risk of rejection seemed too great. These unspoken loves have their own place in memory, their own bittersweet quality, the wonder of what might have been mixed with the acceptance of what was, of the paths not taken, of the alternate lives that existed only in imagination. Perhaps there was someone at work, someone whose company was sought out, whose presence made difficult days bearable, whose absence was felt with a keenness that could not be explained or acknowledged. Perhaps there was a friend of a friend, someone glimpsed at social gatherings, someone who sparked something that could not be pursued because of existing commitments, because of circumstances, because of timing that was wrong in every way except in the feeling itself. Loss sits quietly in the corner of the room, not demanding attention but impossible to ignore. People who were once the center of everything are gone now, their absence a presence all its own, a shape in the air where they used to be. The night is when their memory feels closest, when the loneliness of their absence settles in like a familiar ache, the kind that does not scream but simply persists, a dull reminder of what was and what will never be again. And yet, there is comfort in remembering them, in allowing their faces to return, their voices to echo, their laughter to fill the silence for just a moment. They are not truly gone as long as they are remembered, as long as the night offers space to visit with them in the only way that remains, through the stories that replay, the moments that refuse to fade, the love that outlasts the body it once inhabited. Parents gone for decades now but still present in habits and phrases and ways of thinking that were absorbed without awareness and now cannot be separated from the self. Siblings claimed by illness or accident, friends who slipped away one by one, colleagues who filled workdays with companionship and then retired or relocated or simply faded from contact. Each loss created a gap, a space that could never be quite filled by anyone else, because each person is unique, irreplaceable, carrying a particular combination of qualities and shared history that dies with them. The loss of a spouse, if that loss has occurred, is perhaps the heaviest weight the night must hold. The person who knew everything, who witnessed the full arc of adult life, who was there for the mundane and the momentous, who shared the bed and the breakfast table and the 1,000 tiny rituals that make up a shared existence. Their absence creates a silence within the silence, a void that changes the shape of every day, every night, every moment. The house feels wrong without them, too large or too empty or simply too quiet. The routines that were built around two people now must be performed alone, and even years after the loss, there are moments when the impulse arises to turn and say something, to share an observation or a joke, only to remember again that there is no one there to receive it. And yet, time does its work. The sharpness of grief softens into something more bearable, not an ending of love but a transformation of it, a learning to carry that love forward into a life that must continue, that does continue whether one is ready for it or not. There are conversations still had with them in the mind, questions asked and answers imagined, a continuation of relationship in a form that would have seemed impossible in the early days of loss but which has become natural, necessary, a way of keeping them present even in their absence. The process of grieving is remembered now as a journey through a landscape that kept changing, that offered no map, that demanded more strength than seemed available. The early days were a blur of shock and denial, of going through motions that felt meaningless, of being surrounded by people offering comfort that could not touch the core of pain. Then came anger at the unfairness of it all, at the universe or God or fate for allowing this to happen, at the person who left for leaving, even though leaving was not their choice. Then bargaining, the useless wondering about what if and if only, the replaying of events looking for some moment where a different choice might have led to a different outcome. Then depression, the deep dark days when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the future looked like nothing but an endless expanse of emptiness, when the question arose of whether life was worth living without them. And finally, slowly, acceptance, not a giving up but a recognition that this was the reality now, that life would continue and that they would want it to continue, that honoring their memory meant living, not merely surviving but actually living, finding joy again, connecting with others again, being present in the world again. Time has become a tangible thing, something that can be felt in the stiffness of joints, the slowness of movement, the way the calendar seems to flip faster with each passing year. The future is no longer an endless stretch of possibility but a narrower path, one that leads to a destination that cannot be avoided, only accepted. There is no fear in this awareness, not really, just a quiet recognition that the days are numbered now, that what remains must be savored, that the small moments matter more than the grand plans that once occupied so much mental space. Health becomes a daily negotiation, a conversation with a body that no longer obeys as it once did, that requires rest and care and patience, that sometimes betrays with sudden pain or unexpected weakness. But even this is part of the journey, part of the natural arc of a life that has been lived fully, honestly, with all its flaws and triumphs woven together into something that, when seen from this quiet vantage point, resembles a kind of grace. The doctor's appointments multiply, the medications accumulate, the list of things that once were easy but now require caution or assistance grows longer. There is humility in this, and sometimes frustration, sometimes anger at the unfairness of physical decline, at the loss of independence, at the need to rely on others for things that should be simple. But mostly there is acceptance, a recognition that this is how life works, that every living thing moves through stages, that the strength and beauty of youth give way to the wisdom and depth of age, and eventually to the frailty and dependency of life's final chapters. Mortality is no longer abstract, no longer something that happens to other people, to strangers in news reports or distant relatives whose funerals are attended out of obligation. It is personal now, immediate, a presence that sits at the edge of awareness, patient and inevitable. This awareness could be terrifying, and perhaps in some moments it is, but mostly it brings a strange clarity, a stripping away of pretense and distraction, a focusing on what truly matters in whatever time remains. The fear of death itself, of the moment of transition, of whatever does or does not come after, fades in comparison to other fears, the fear of pain, of losing dignity, of becoming a burden, of losing mental capacity before the body gives out. There is hope for a good death, whatever that might mean, a death that comes gently, that allows for farewells if possible, that happens with some measure of peace and acceptance rather than panic and struggle. But this too is beyond control, one more thing that must be surrendered to forces larger than the self, one more reminder that for all the agency exercised over a lifetime, there are fundamental aspects of existence that remain mysterious, ungovernable, subject to fate or chance or divine will, depending on what one believes. The question of what comes after death, if anything, has occupied philosophers and theologians for millennia, and here in the darkness it arises again, without any more certainty than it ever had. Perhaps there is an afterlife, a continuation of consciousness in some form, a reunion with those who have gone before. Perhaps there is reincarnation, a return to life in a different body, a new chance to learn and grow and evolve. Perhaps there is nothing, simply the cessation of awareness, the same state of non-existence that preceded birth, neither frightening nor comforting but simply neutral, the natural end of the biological process that is life. Or perhaps it is something entirely different, something that cannot be imagined from this side of the veil, something that will be revealed in its own time and not before. The uncertainty is sometimes frustrating, sometimes peaceful, and mostly it is simply part of the mystery, part of the larger unknowing that characterizes so much of existence. Faith, if it is present, offers some comfort, some framework for understanding, some hope that death is not an ending but a transition. Doubt, if it is present, brings its own kind of peace, a freedom from worrying about judgment or punishment, a focus on making this life meaningful without regard for what might come after. Acceptance settles over the mind like a blanket, warm and heavy. Life was not perfect, far from it, but it was real, and that counts for something. Mistakes were made, yes, so many mistakes, moments of selfishness, of cowardice, of blindness to the needs of others, but there was also effort, there was endurance, there was honesty even when honesty was hard. The person who lived this life did their best with what they had, with the knowledge they possessed, with the strength they could muster, and if that was not always enough, well, whose life ever is? Perfection was never the goal, even if it sometimes felt like it should be. The goal was simply to keep going, to love as well as possible, to show up for the people who mattered, to contribute something however small, to the world that gave so much and took so much in return. There is peace in this acceptance, a laying down of the burden of self-judgment, a recognition that the story is what it is, that the chapters have unfolded in the only way they could have given the person writing them, that regret and pride can coexist, that a life can be simultaneously flawed and beautiful, ordinary and extraordinary, simple and infinitely complex. The world itself has changed beyond recognition over the course of this long life. The world of childhood seems almost mythical now, a place where life moved at a different pace, where communication happened face to face or through letters that took days to arrive, where information was scarce and entertainment was simple. The march of technology has been relentless, each decade bringing innovations that would have seemed like magic to the child who once played on that sunlit street. Television arrived and changed how people spent their evenings, how they understood the world beyond their immediate surroundings. Computers followed, first massive machines in special rooms, then personal devices that sat on desks, then laptops that could be carried anywhere, then smartphones that put the power of computation and communication in every pocket. The internet connected everyone and everything, creating a global network that made information instantly available, that allowed for communication across vast distances, that transformed commerce and culture and politics and relationships. Some of these changes have been welcome, making life easier or more connected or more interesting. Others have brought loss, the erosion of privacy, the acceleration of pace, the sense that something essential about human connection has been diminished in the rush toward efficiency and convenience. The person lying in this bed has lived through wars and peace, through economic booms and busts, through social movements that challenged and sometimes changed long-held beliefs and structures. They have witnessed both progress and regression, both the expansion of rights and freedoms and the resistance to that expansion, both acts of extraordinary courage and compassion and acts of terrible cruelty and indifference. History was not something that happened in books but something that unfolded in real time, that shaped lives and opportunities, that created the context in which choices were made and futures were built. The Great Depression, perhaps, or World War II, or the Cold War, or the Civil Rights Movement, or the Feminist Revolution, or the technological explosion of the late 20th century, depending on when this particular life began. Each era had its challenges and its triumphs, its fears and its hopes, and the person who lived through these eras was shaped by them, carries them still in memory and in the accumulated wisdom or confusion or resignation that comes from witnessing so much change, so much history, so much human drama playing out on scales both intimate and global. Their own beliefs have evolved or perhaps in some cases hardened over the years. The certainties of youth have given way to ambiguities, or in some cases the questioning of youth has given way to a return to tradition, to a need for stability and clear answers in a world that seems increasingly chaotic and uncertain. Religion may have been a constant presence, a source of comfort and community, a framework for understanding suffering and meaning and morality. Or it may have been abandoned, found wanting in the face of suffering and injustice, unable to provide satisfactory answers to the hardest questions. Or it may have been absent from the start, leaving a life built on secular values and human connection rather than divine command. Politics may have been a passion or an irritation, something engaged with deeply or avoided as too divisive, too frustrating, too removed from the daily concerns of earning a living and raising a family. Opinions have been formed and reformed, judgments made and revised, lines drawn and sometimes erased. And now, looking back, it becomes clear that certainty was often an illusion, that the world is far more complicated than any ideology or belief system can capture, that people are capable of both great good and great harm, often within the same lifetime, sometimes within the same action. Pride does not announce itself with fanfare, but it is there, quiet and steady, in the knowledge of small achievements that were never celebrated but mattered all the same. Showing up every day even when every day felt too heavy to bear. Providing stability when chaos threatened. Staying strong through hardship when giving up would have been easier. These are not the accomplishments that make headlines, that earn awards, that get remembered in grand eulogies, but they are the bedrock of a life, the foundation upon which everything else was built. There is satisfaction in knowing that others could depend on that foundation, that it held firm when tested, that it was there, solid and reliable, even if it was taken for granted, even if it was never acknowledged aloud. The work that was done, whether in an office or a factory or a home, was done as well as possible given the circumstances. The bills were paid or mostly paid, or at least the effort to pay them was genuine and sustained. The responsibilities were met, the obligations fulfilled, the duties performed even when performing them brought no joy, no recognition, no reward beyond the simple knowledge that it was what needed to be done. There is pride, too, in survival. Life brought challenges, some anticipated and some utterly unexpected, and they were weathered. Illness was endured, financial crisis was navigated, loss was grieved and then somehow transcended enough to allow for continued living. The temptation to give up was sometimes strong, especially in the darkest periods, but something kept the person going, some core of resilience or stubbornness or perhaps simply inertia, the momentum of a life in motion. And now, still here, still breathing, still capable of thought and memory and feeling, there is a quiet victory in that, a triumph that needs no audience, no validation because the fact itself is enough. The years were accumulated one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, sometimes one breath at a time, and somehow those increments added up to a lifetime, to this moment, to this particular night among all the nights that have passed and all the nights that may or may not remain. There is pride in kindnesses offered even when they were small, even when they cost little. The door held open, the smile given to a stranger, the listening ear provided to someone in distress, the help offered without expectation of return. These moments may have been forgotten by the recipients, may have seemed insignificant even at the time, but they mattered, they added something to the world, they made life marginally better for someone else, and that is not nothing. In a world that often seems dominated by selfishness and cruelty, by competition and conflict, every act of genuine kindness is a small rebellion, a declaration that there is another way to be, that connection and compassion are possible even in difficult circumstances. And while a life cannot be judged solely by its kindest moments any more than it can be judged solely by its worst, those moments of generosity and care are part of the story, are threads woven into the larger tapestry, and they deserve recognition, if only in the private accounting that happens in the silence of night. Forgiveness arrives in the night like a visitor who has been standing outside for years, waiting to be invited in. Old resentments, nursed for so long they became part of the landscape, begin to lose their grip, their edges softening in the gentle darkness. The wrongs done by others seem smaller now, less significant when measured against the passage of time, and the wrongs done to oneself, the self-blame, the harsh judgments, these too begin to ease. Night offers a softness that daytime, with its bright accountability, rarely allows. It permits the possibility of letting go, of releasing the grip on anger and disappointment, of acknowledging that everyone, including the person lying in this bed, was doing their best in a world that offered no instruction manual, no guarantee of success, no promise that effort would be rewarded. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, not about pretending the hurt did not happen, but about releasing its power, about deciding that carrying it forward serves no purpose, that peace is more valuable than being right. The people who caused pain were themselves flawed and struggling, carrying their own wounds and fears, acting out of their own limitations and blind spots. This understanding does not excuse the harm, but it contextualizes it, makes it possible to see the person beyond the action, to hold both the hurt and the humanity in the same awareness. Forgiving oneself is perhaps harder than forgiving others. The mistakes made, the people hurt, the opportunities wasted, these things can weigh heavily, can create a narrative of failure or inadequacy that plays on repeat, especially in the vulnerable hours of night. But this too can be softened, can be met with compassion rather than condemnation. What would be said to a friend who confessed these same regrets, who carried this same burden of self-judgment? Would the response be harsh or would it be kind? Would there be an acknowledgement of context, of the limitations of human nature, of the impossibility of living a life without error? And if kindness can be extended to others, why not to the self? Why not to the person who has carried this particular life for all these years, who has struggled and strived and suffered and survived? The forgiveness that comes in the night is quiet, tentative, not a dramatic transformation but a gentle shift, a small loosening of the tight grip that shame and regret have held. It is a beginning or perhaps a continuation of a process that has been unfolding slowly over years, a gradual movement toward peace, toward acceptance, toward a more compassionate relationship with the self that has lived this imperfect, beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life. Lessons learned through experience accumulate like layers of sediment, building up over years until they form something solid, something that can be stood upon. What truly mattered in the end was not money, not status, not the approval of strangers, but connection, love, moments of genuine presence with others. The things that seemed so important at the time, the promotions, the acquisitions, the competitions, these fade into insignificance when viewed from the perspective of a life nearly complete. What remains are the moments of tenderness, the times when someone needed help and it was given, the times when fear was set aside to do what was necessary, the times when laughter broke through the weight of the world and made everything, just for a moment, feel light and possible. Priorities changed with time, as they must, as they should, and the wisdom of age is not in knowing everything but in knowing what matters and what does not, in being able to distinguish between the noise and the music, between the distraction and the truth. Time revealed itself to be the most precious resource, more valuable than money because it could not be earned or saved or recovered once spent. Every moment given to work that was meaningless or to worry that was unproductive or to conflict that was petty was a moment that could have been spent differently, better, more in alignment with what ultimately proved to matter. Relationships, it becomes clear, are everything. Not just the dramatic relationships, the romances and the family bonds, but all of them, the web of connection that makes up a human life. The colleague who made difficult days bearable with humor, the neighbor who checked in during illness, the stranger who offered directions when lost, these too are part of the story, these too added something irreplaceable. Human beings are not meant to be alone, are not built for isolation, and whatever was accomplished or experienced or understood was made richer by being shared, by being witnessed by others, by being part of a collective human experience rather than a solitary journey. The lessons learned were often learned in relationship, through the friction and joy of interacting with other people, through the challenge of seeing beyond one's own perspective, through the growth that comes from being called to be better, kinder, more patient than comes naturally. And the failures were often failures of relationship, moments when connection was refused or damaged, when ego or fear prevented the vulnerability that intimacy requires, when the easier path of withdrawal or defensiveness was chosen over the harder path of engagement and honesty. Another lesson, hard one and sometimes still difficult to fully embrace, is the necessity of letting go. Control was always an illusion, an attempt to create certainty in an uncertain world, but life had a way of demolishing that illusion again and again. Children grew up and made their own choices, choices that sometimes seemed unwise but which could not be prevented. Careers took unexpected turns, health declined in ways that could not be stopped, loved ones left or died, the world changed in directions that seemed wrong or frightening. And through it all, the lesson was the same, that holding too tightly caused suffering, that flexibility was more useful than rigidity, that acceptance of what could not be changed was the only path to peace. This does not mean passivity, does not mean refusing to act or to try to shape circumstances, but it means recognizing the limits of individual power, means understanding that some things are beyond control and that energy spent fighting reality is energy wasted. Energy that could be better used adapting, adjusting, finding new paths forward when old ones are blocked. The future, such as it is, holds no grand expectations. There are no mountains left to climb, no dragons left to slay, only the simple continuation of days, each one a gift if approached with the right frame of mind. The desire now is not for more but for enough, not for excitement but for peace, not for achievement but for rest. The ambitions that once drove so much behavior have quieted, replaced by a gentler set of hopes, to wake each morning without too much pain, to see the faces of loved ones, to feel the sun when it manages to break through the clouds, to sit in stillness without the need to fill it with activity. Simplicity has become the goal, the stripping away of the unnecessary until what remains is just life itself, plain and unadorned, beautiful in its ordinariness, sufficient in its own right. The accumulation of possessions that once seemed important now feels like a burden, like clutter that will need to be sorted through, disposed of, passed on to people who may or may not want it. What matters is not the things but the memories attached to them, and those memories exist with or without the physical objects, exist in the mind and heart, and will persist as long as consciousness persists. There is hope for whatever time remains to be gentle, to be filled with small pleasures, a good meal, a conversation with someone who listens, a book that captures attention, a moment of beauty in the natural world. The bucket list, if there ever was one, has either been completed or abandoned, recognized as less important than it once seemed. Travel may no longer be possible or appealing, the body too fragile, the energy too limited, the comfort of home too precious to leave. And that is okay, that is enough, because every place worth seeing has already been seen, or else it has not been seen and now will not be, and either way life goes on, life is complete as it is, not lacking anything essential. The relationships that can be mended have been mended, or else they have not and now likely will not be, and that too must be accepted, must be integrated into the story without allowing it to poison what remains. There is no time left for grudges, for prolonged conflict, for the luxury of being right at the expense of being connected. What can be repaired, let it be repaired. What cannot, let it be released. The night is no longer something to be endured, no longer an enemy that steals the sleep the body craves. It has become a companion, a quiet presence that listens without interrupting, that accepts without judgment, that offers space for all the thoughts and memories and feelings that daylight cannot hold. The darkness is not frightening, not anymore, because it is familiar, because it has held these thoughts so many times before, because it asks nothing in return for its patient attention. There is comfort in this, in knowing that the night will always be here, that it will always offer this sanctuary, this place where the mind can roam free, where the past can be visited without apology, where the future can be contemplated without anxiety. The night understands what the day often forgets, that life is not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be experienced, that not everything needs to be fixed or changed or improved, that sometimes the greatest wisdom is simply in bearing witness, in allowing things to be as they are, in finding peace not through transformation but through acceptance. The stars, if they are visible through the window, if the curtains are open and the sky is clear, shine with the same light that has shone for millennia, light that left its source long before this life began and which will continue its journey long after this life ends. There is both insignificance and meaning in this, insignificance in the vastness of space and time that makes a single human life seem impossibly small, and meaning in the fact that this small life is still part of the whole, is still connected to everything else, is still a unique expression of the universe experiencing itself. The same atoms that form a human body once existed in stars, forged in distant furnaces of light long before memory, language, or identity ever came into being, and those same atoms will continue on in other forms long after the body itself has returned to dust. They have traveled unimaginable distances, endured immense pressures and shifted endlessly from one state to another, quietly participating in the slow construction of worlds, oceans, soil, and life itself. Nothing is ever truly created or destroyed, only transformed, rearranged, and repurposed within an endless cycle that stretches far beyond any single lifetime. Within this understanding lives both sadness and hope, woven together so tightly they cannot be separated. There is sadness for the loss of this particular form, this familiar body, this specific consciousness that once looked out at the world through a unique pair of eyes, felt joy and grief in its own particular way, and gathered experiences that will never be repeated in exactly the same combination again. And yet there is hope as well, quiet and steady, that something continues, that the energy which animated this life does not simply vanish into nothingness but changes shape, moves onward, persists in ways that may never be fully understood or clearly named. This continuation may not fit neatly into any religious framework or spiritual doctrine, may resist clear explanation or proof, but it feels real nonetheless, sensed not through logic but through intuition, through a deep inner recognition that life participates in something far larger and far older than itself. Thoughts begin to slow, their once frantic pace easing gradually into something gentler, something that flows rather than races, no longer colliding with one another or demanding immediate attention. The mind, which has spent the day and perhaps many years turning over memories, questions, regrets, plans, and half-formed observations, begins to tire, to soften at the edges, to lose the sharp focus that once felt so necessary. Concentration loosens without effort, and the need to hold everything together fades. Breathing deepens naturally, without instruction, each inhale and exhale becoming more deliberate, more soothing, settling into a rhythm that feels ancient and instinctive, a rhythm that quietly guides the body toward the rest it has been seeking all along. The memories that were once vivid and emotionally charged begin to recede, not disappearing entirely but drifting farther away, becoming background music rather than the main melody, present but no longer demanding. The body, which has been tense with the effort of thinking, remembering, analyzing, and processing, begins to surrender little by little, releasing muscles that have held tight without realizing it, letting the shoulders drop, the jaw loosen, the limbs grow heavy. There is a growing trust that sleep, when it finally arrives, will be gentle and kind, not abrupt or demanding. The weight of the blanket becomes more noticeable now, a comforting pressure that signals safety and containment, a reminder of being held, being grounded, being secure within this familiar space. The pillow cradles the head just right, supporting it without strain, and that elusive position of comfort is finally found, that precise arrangement of limbs and posture that allows the body to fully relax. The impulse to move, to adjust, to fidget or search for something better gradually subsides, replaced by stillness and quiet acceptance. The house continues its night sounds, the subtle creaks and sighs that mark the cooling of wood and plaster, the settling of a structure that has stood for decades and will stand for decades more, bearing witness to countless nights much like this one. These sounds no longer startle or distract but instead feel soothing, familiar, part of the gentle lullaby the night sings as the world slows. They form a quiet conversation between the physical space and the consciousness resting within it, a reminder that nothing is truly silent, only softer. Outside, the world sleeps too, or at least rests, the daytime bustle reduced to occasional and distant signs of movement. A car passing far away, tires humming briefly before fading into nothing, the rustle of wind moving through leaves, the call of a night bird marking territory or seeking a mate beneath the stars. Life continues even in darkness, even in stillness, unfolding patiently without fanfare. The great will keeps turning as it always has, indifferent to individual worries and private concerns, yet somehow deeply comforting in its reliability, its steadiness, its refusal to stop simply because one small part of it has grown tired and is ready to rest. The journey through the night has been long, a winding path through decades of living, of loving, of losing, of learning, a quiet passage through moments that once felt endless and now feel compressed into a single stream of memory. It has carried joys that once burned bright and pains that once felt unbearable, small ordinary days and rare unforgettable ones, all blending together in the soft darkness. But every journey, no matter how complex or meandering, must eventually come to a place of rest, a moment when the traveler is allowed to set down the weight they have been carrying and simply exist without purpose or demand. This is that moment when striving finally loosens its grip, when seeking no longer feels necessary, when there is no hunger for answers or outcomes, only the presence of this quiet breath moving in and out, this gentle darkness that asks for nothing, this peaceful surrender that feels earned rather than forced. The mind no longer resists what is coming, no longer struggles against the natural pull of sleep or clings to wakefulness out of habit or fear. Instead, it allows itself to drift, to float without effort on the slow current of exhaustion mixed with acceptance, trusting that tomorrow, if it arrives, will unfold as it must, without planning or worry tonight. Right now is not for solving problems or revisiting old questions. It is for rest, for stillness, for releasing everything that has been held for so long. The thoughts that once insisted on being heard, that demanded attention earlier in the night, have lost their urgency and sharpness. They have softened into something distant and dreamlike, fragments without structure, images without clear context, feelings stripped of the edges that once made them painful or joyful or urgent. They rise briefly and fade again, appearing and dissolving like gentle waves against a shore that is slowly coming into view, a shoreline that promises solidity after a long crossing of uncertain waters, where effort is no longer required and the journey itself can finally pause. Sleep is close now, very close, hovering just at the edge of consciousness like a patient and familiar friend who has been waiting quietly for the right moment to be invited in. It does not rush or demand, but lingers calmly, ready to take over when resistance has fully fallen away, ready to carry the mind out of this space of memory, reflection, and gentle thought into the wordless world beyond. That world may take the shape of dreams, fleeting and symbolic, or it may open into something even deeper and quieter, the true rest of unconsciousness where thought dissolves entirely. This nightly descent is a kind of rehearsal, a soft practice for that final sleep that will one day come, though not tonight, not yet. Tonight is only a temporary release, a small death followed by a gentle rebirth that happens every evening when the body finally persuades the mind to relinquish its vigilance. It is the moment when control is surrendered, when the mind agrees to trust that the world will continue turning without its supervision, that nothing essential will be lost by letting go. In this surrender, the deep processes of restoration and healing begin their work, silently and invisibly, repairing what has been worn down, resetting what has been strained, without instruction or awareness. The breath slows even further now, becoming so light and subtle it almost seems to disappear, a barely perceptible movement that continues on its own. The boundary between waking and sleeping thins until it becomes permeable, porous, no longer clearly defined. It becomes impossible to say which side of that boundary the mind occupies, and soon it no longer matters. The question itself dissolves, along with the last traces of effort and awareness, into the spreading warmth of sleep that finally arrives, merciful and gentle, closing over consciousness like calm water, carrying everything into quiet, into safety, into rest. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night.